I want my clients to enjoy the process and to understand the process, because it's already complex without having to overwhelm people with technical jargon. But I think one of the key ways to really help people who are overwhelmed, if they've got a good budget, is to have an agent represent them, which is, you know, your architect. So there's all these other people in the team, whether it be structural engineers, interior designers, basics consultants, surveyors, town planners, whatever. And it's one thing for a client to understand all the people in the team that they might need, but it's another to have someone just deal with it all for them.
Hi, I'm Beth Beesky, the founder of More Time to Design and your host of the Design Dialogues podcast. I've been a designer for the last 12 years and I've run my own studio for 5, and I know how hard it is to run a successful business. You not only need to be great at designing, but you need to be great at all the other things as well. I created More Time to Design, a software platform to help designers run efficient studios, and I've created the Design Dialogue podcast to help us all learn together. Each week, we will meet professionals who are at the top of their game doing things that help us run our studios. We'll have conversations with social media managers, interior design mentors, copywriters, stylists, photographers, suppliers, and also designers who have been in the game for a long time and who have such a wealth of knowledge to share. I hope that each week you feel inspired and informed at the end of each of our design dialogues. So join me for the Design Dialogue podcast. Hi everyone, welcome to episode 9 of the Design Dialogues podcast. This week I'm talking with Nikki Quittner. Before we get to the dialogue, I wanted to remind you about the 30-day free trial that we offer with More Time to Design. More Time to Design is an interior design, studio and project management software that will change the way you run your studio. It is the place where you will do all your business and project admin tasks in one place. If you want to know how to build a better business, follow the links in our show notes to see how you can change your business today for the better. I also have a favor to ask. If you are enjoying the podcast, I would love for you to leave a review. Reviews are one of the best ways for people to find the podcast. If you're unsure how to leave a review, I will put in the show notes some simple instructions to follow. I really do appreciate you taking the time to leave a review. In today's episode, we are chatting with Nikki about architecture and what she is seeing in the industry at the moment. Nikki is going to be one of our regular guests, and I know you are going to enjoy hearing everything Nikki has to offer. If you have any questions you would like Nikki to answer in upcoming episodes, please let me know. Send me an email or a DM. I hope you enjoy this design dialogue. Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of the Design Dialogues podcast. And today we are talking to Nikki Quittner. Hi Nikki.
Hi Beth, how are you?
Good, how are you? So Nikki is an architect who I have had the pleasure of knowing for a while, and we've chatted a lot about interiors and architecture and the intersection of the two. And Nikki is going to be one of our regular guests on the podcast. So we are going to pick her brain for all things architecture. So Nikki, I love to ask everyone, what can you see out your window today?
So I'm in Darlinghurst, or our office is in Darlinghurst. So out our window is a view of St Mary's Cathedral and all the little row houses kind of looking towards the harbour. So it's a really lovely view. And actually in our immediate view is a tree with a little nest for a bird in it. So pretty picturesque for Darlinghurst.
I can attest to that. I've been to Nikki's office and it's a very lovely view. So you're very lucky. So I'd love to hear a bit about your business, how you've gotten to where you are. You work for yourself, you have your own studio, you have a couple of different businesses that you run that we'll investigate a little bit more. But how did you get to where you are today?
Thanks, Beth, and thanks for having me. So to start off, I'm a registered architect. I've been practicing for about 15 years. But I would say since I studied at Sydney Uni back in 2007. And I always thought a little bit differently about architecture. even since then, I was puzzling why we sort of, and Beth, we were having this conversation just earlier about at what point architects are engaged. And I think it's very similar to when interior architects, interior designers are engaged at a certain point in the piece. And I always thought it was interesting that we weren't, earlier in the process to help our clients manage their expectations, because it is such a big and complex sort of process. And essentially have been working since then. I graduated from Sydney Uni. I did an exchange in Sweden. So I studied there for a short period of time for my master's. Came back and was lucky enough to work at a really great architecture practice, Smart Design Studio, which is, a really amazing leading firm in terms of boutique design. And it gave me a really great education and foundation to the advice that I provide today. I also worked at a larger commercial practice that has offices right across Australia. And that was a really important step for me as well, where I had the high-end design education, but wanted that commercial awareness to understand at what point you can draw a line and come up with a really, really good product, but still run a sustainable business, because that ripple effect is actually going to have a better result for our clients if we've got people who are rested and ready to give that professional advice with flair and energy and headspace, because it's a real blend of the practical component, the professional component, and the creative component. So working at those two practices was definitely instrumental. I worked at a few other practices as well, but I would say they were the two most sort of important and influential to where I am today. And essentially I got to about 30 and I'd been working for a while, and it was just time to press go on something that had been brewing, as I said, ever since 2007, which was why is architecture only available in this large, expensive, complex sort of point in time? How great would it be if we could be available to everyday people right across Australia, whether they want to work with us all the way through or not? There's so much expertise that we have to offer. And at the end of the day, the really scary statistic is of the 95%, of all the Australians renovating in Australia, 95% of them don't work with an architect. So if only 5% of people are working with architects,
that's an amazing statistic.
I know. And the really scary thing about that, I suppose, when you become a registered architect, you understand the risks associated with renovation. And not just that, we're registered not so that we can call ourselves architects. It's actually to protect the consumer by a board that we are accountable to. So that if there are any problems, an everyday person can ring up the board and actually have a conversation about whether our professional services was, adequate, whether the advice we were providing was reasonable, whether the service we were providing was potentially negligent or not. So it empowers everyday people to be protected, and it enforces us to continue our professional development, have relative levels of professional indemnity insurance, all sorts of things that we are held to. So I think it's really difficult for renovators out there, because there's so many TV shows and all kinds of renovation programs where they're not necessarily, the architect is kind of hidden behind the scenes or not there at all. And so it's understandable that a lot of people wouldn't know that our service not just provides that protection, but it's going to add a lot of value and make your money work a lot harder to give you the best result possible. And that's only also possible working with people like yourself and your power team.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it? Like, you kind of, I think there's a couple of ways that projects go. Like, they either start with the architect, and it's usually kind of like, the big name architect and all that kind of stuff. And quite often the architect designs this beautiful plan and all this kind of stuff, and then it goes to the builder, and the builder's like, well, that's going to cost triple your budget, and it goes backwards and forwards kind of thing. And I always think that's such an interesting journey for the client. Like, it's quite a challenging journey for the client, really. Like, I don't really think anyone comes out, like, I just don't think it's the best journey for the client. But then there's the opposite, where they're like, no, we won't talk to an architect because they're too expensive. Like, architect just means money, and we don't have the budget for it. But then what ends up happening is they might go to a builder first, and then the builder's like, well, I need some plans to actually build something off, and then it's like they kind of get this, it's not really like an actual design, it's just kind of something that's been put together for a builder. And I'm kind of like, I think if more people understood the value that professionals bring to their project, architects and interior designers, and if they saw the value rather than the money, then the process would run so much smoother. Like, I'm a big believer in bringing your team together. Like, I don't think you should bring your builder on halfway through the process. Like, I think you need to have your builder in the conversation right at the start, because architects know so much, but then builders also know so much when it comes to pricing, as do interior designers. So I think sometimes I kind of think as an industry, we could work together so much better.
Yep. I mean, actually, what the perceptions are also, they're there for a reason. There's people who have had genuinely like really bad experiences, and that's really unfortunate. And it always is so heartbreaking for me, because there are so many great ones out there who are going to blow you away, but they're there for a reason. And those perceptions need to be broken. But I equally think that the big costs, and this is what often I tell people, and there's a place for every profession, whether people go with a building designer or an architect, it's all dependent on the outcome that you're hoping to achieve. But to look at an architect's fee, or the difference between two architects, if you're comparing two fee proposals, relative to the cost, the real cost, which is the build, it's actually fairly inconsequential. And I say that because with the right architect and the right connections and the right design, they could save you hundreds of thousands of dollars in materials, in long-term maintenance, in reducing heating, cooling bills, like all sorts of things. So, but $6,000 between the two, or 10,000, whatever it might be, they can actually save that money and add, millions of dollars in value. So it's not to say I'm just justifying, our profession, because that's what I mean. Because the reason I set up my business, Test Point Invest, is because there were issues with the industry and with our profession. But I would say that focus on the fact that you've got a really big cost, which is the build. And either way, whether you're getting an interior architect, building designer, draftsperson, architect, either way, you're building that wall, that door, that skirting, that ceiling, that light fixture. How hard do you want those things to work for you to give you a better result in terms of your own enjoyment of the space and the resale value of the property? Case in point, a job that I did at one of my previous offices, client, this is, extreme, it's a very high-end property, but in the same market, they bought the property for, I think it was for 4, spent 2, so 6 in total, sold in the same market for 14. So it's just to say that, there's way less extremes of that, where it might be, classic example I can give you. I think this is where we've got to justify our services with case studies. A project in the upper north that we worked on, where the client had a really small budget of $350,000. They went to a draftsperson to draw up what they had in mind for it, and it was a literal interpretation of what they'd asked for, which is understandable. What it was an extension out the back, which meant that, number one, it was excavating into the earth to be able to build the structure, because it was on a slope. It was waterproofing, external, an external building that they now have to roof and waterproof and footings and service and all that sort of stuff. It self-shadowed because it was semi-south facing at the back. So this whole structure just cast a shadow on their backyard, and the footprint was kind of disconnected. And to add to that, it's in a conservation area. So the costs of having to go through council in this case, all for a little $350,000 budget. Now, to top that all off, this whole job was probably about $800,000 to do, and their budget was $350,000. So they thought they were saving money with the drafts person in this instance, and not paying for an architect, because understandably architects can be more expensive. And we can't compare, our services are quite different. So not apples for apples anyway. But we had a look at the floor plan and realized it's an old house, and there's so much inefficiency in a lot of old properties with oversized corridors and weird little nooks and crannies. So we cleaned out all of the interiors and was able to get them everything that they needed within the existing footprint. And the living dining kitchen was, it was awesome. It was this open plan, U-shaped living dining in the heart of the building, like looking straight out to the garden. and it was on their budget, 350,000. And the funny thing was, the client looked at the plan and went, I know this isn't what I asked for specifically, but it's what I want. And it's an amazing result. And for that, they, you know, they bought that property for circa 2. They spent 350,000, and the property is probably worth about 4.5 now. So that's where I'm sort of saying, like,
yeah, I mean, I think that point where so often, so these people, they've bought this home, they've lived in it for a while, and they've like, it's not meeting our needs. And so they come up with a plan, and then quite often they're like, what they think they want, they just have one way of seeing it. And so being able to engage a professional to help them interpret that in a different way. But I actually think it's at this end of the budget, like, you know, the 250, like under 500K, their budgets are working really hard, especially these days where, you know, building costs is so much kind of thing. And so it can be really hard to help clients see, yes, spend that little bit more with like an architect, bringing an architect in, but the end result will be so much better. So it can be hard.
It is hard. And I suppose that is kind of why I set up Test Before You Invest, so that people can just access our expertise, even if it's just upfront for, you know, a few $100s, to at least help them manage their expectations and set them on the right path before spending all this money engaging all these professionals, whether it be interior architect, building designer, or architect. Either way, it's you know, going to be thousands of dollars. And how good would it be if before you start this process, you have a conversation to understand the likelihood that your brief can be met? What are the design opportunities? How ballpark, you know, a bit about cost. And this is kind of a thing that I found just from working for circa 10 years before starting the business, was so often clients would say things like, but I just want to know. I just want to know the big picture. Like, how much ballpark is it going to cost in total? Like, how do I get this thing approved? How long is it going to take me from start to finish? What are the odds of my brief being able to be achieved? So that is kind of what I responded to in creating Test Before You Invest.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me a bit more in detail about Test Before You Invest, because I think this is a really interesting model. And I know, I think something that, well, I've become more aware of, it might have been around for a while, but there's a lot more of these kind of business models that people are setting up that are not just your average architecture service or your average interior design studio. Like, you know, I know there's and the name is going to escape me. I always do this. I talk about something and I'm like, I should know the name. But there's a lady down in Tassie, and totally different. But she has renovated like her own, I think she's renovated about 10 homes down in Tassie. And her and her husband do it all themselves. And they've set up a business that's very much like, we're really good at DIY. And we know how to change a floor plan in a way that makes it not expensive and you can do it yourself. And she set up a business that kind of is along that. Now, that's at the very different scale to what you're doing. But I think it's a really interesting time in the industry because there is becoming more ways for people to access this kind of advice. So, you know, where before it was engage an architect in the traditional sense, engage an interior designer kind of thing. But now there's these more kind of, I suppose, evolving business models. So, tell me a little bit about the process.
Yeah, and it's really good that people are looking at different ways to provide our service, because I mean, part of the reason I did this, like, I'd say 90% of it is to help people. That's my driver. But there is a component that is, there is just this gap in service, and architects, if we keep looking at our service in the conventional way that we've done it, we're going to be out of work. Because we've lost a lot of work already to other great services that are available, project managers, building designers, all sorts of professions. And we've lost it for a reason, because we've kind of been losing control of a lot of things we're very capable of doing and very competent in. So for me, I just wanted to promote architecture, and as I said, the main agenda is to make it available to anyone, to democratize architecture, so people don't feel it's only for the rich, for the people who have a $4 million budget. It's for people who have, sub $500,000. It could even be $100,000. That's all they've got, but at least for $495 they can have a chat with us, and we can hopefully help them on their way and connect them with a few people. So to answer your question about essentially what we do, it's fast, affordable architecture advice on the potential of property before you buy or before you build. So when you're thinking about, say it's before you buy, if I buy this house, to make it work for me, I need that extra bedroom or bathroom, or I need to make the house open plan living, dining, kitchen, or I need to add a car space or a swimming pool, a few $100, book us in for a consultation, and we'll help sort of demystify some of those questions about whether what the odds are of that being possible, how you might go about it. So if it's with council or a private certifier, and a bit about costing as well. So and we'll talk about this, I think, a little bit later about, cost of construction and where that all goes. But essentially, the service is catered around answering those 4 key questions: design potential and answering their brief, renovation cost estimates, approval strategy, and timeline from start to finish. So that's our consultation service. We also have workshops, which is an extra hour of time. We pull out the butter paper and start sketching up ideas together. And then our other service in that sort of upfront feasibility is a design feasibility report, where we actually provide concept sketches, a little bit about cost estimates. It's a tangible document with demolition diagrams, all sorts of information, even a guideline to your renovation, that you can then hold, respond to, show it to a real estate agent or a builder or a structural engineer, and just as a reaction piece, start the process. But instead of spending, $10,000 on a deposit for concept design with your architect, it's a couple of grand, and it's commitment free, and that's it. And you could take it to another architect and negotiate the fee, because you've already kind of got a sketch in place, or a draftsperson, or if the budget's not big, at least the foundations are there with your architect, and then from there you can go to a building designer, or in some cases actually an interior designer, interior architect, where just getting the fundamentals of the layout there so that an interior designer could run with it.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I feel like when you were talking, I was like, you were like a one-woman mission to save us from more like knockdown rebuilds, replacing beautiful heritage homes with like boxes. Like I feel like just like no more boxes, no more grey and white boxes. And I think that's something that like is such an interesting point, especially because there's so much like buildings are expensive and all this kind of stuff, and everyone's like renovation is hard, and it is. Like renovating is, there's so many more unknowns. Like to build new is always easier, generally always easier. But I think as well, if for someone who isn't familiar with the industry, isn't familiar with building, may have never renovated before, to be able to have that conversation with someone so that they can look at their house with confidence and go, yeah, I can do this. Like, it's okay. We can do this. We don't need to completely knock down and rebuild. We can get out of it what we need. I think that's so important, just on so many levels, especially like not just from a cost, but also as people are becoming a bit, hopefully, more aware of the environmental impacts of just knocking houses down and rebuilding them, and the sustainability factors of all of that kind of stuff. Like, I think it's a really interesting business model. And I think that, I think it's something that more architects and more interior designers should be offering, this kind of initial, as you said, like feasibility of projects, so that people can be really educated around the decisions they're making.
It's funny you say that about the knockdown as well, because I think the easy solution is just knock it down. But actually, the funny thing is, like with buildings, and people know this whether you're buying or you finish your renovation, like there's the cost of building, but then what about the next 20 years? What about having a building that thermally performs to reduce your heating and cooling bills, or orienting the right way to maximize, the sun streaming in winter, but making sure it's protected in summer? What kind of glazing and all sorts of, insulation, all these sort of considerations. So I guess the funny thing is a lot of these older houses, which are beautiful and inherently in their own character, and there's a place for the rebuild too, like we do it all, but they're built better. They're built better than what you can afford to pay, unless you're willing to spend on the labor of beautiful brick again and doing double brick, not brick veneer. A lot of these old houses, which might be double brick, they're going to have way better thermal properties to keep it cool in summer and warmer in winter. And they're just built to last. So a lot of these little boxes, like they might look brand spanking new in the photos, but don't get seduced by that, because have a look at them in 20 years time and you'll see that they're not built to last, unfortunately.
No, they look pretty tired.
And the other thing you mentioned was about the process being complex, and it is. And I think often this can be an architect's downfall, where any profession in a position of power, whether it's a lawyer or a doctor, or they can use technical jargon that can overwhelm people. And sometimes they get off on that. I don't know. I certainly don't. I think I want my clients to enjoy the process and to understand the process, because it's already complex without having to overwhelm people with technical jargon. But I think one of the key ways to really help people who are overwhelmed, if they've got a good budget, is to have an agent represent them, which is, your architect. So there's all these other people in the team, whether it be structural engineers, interior designers, basics consultants, surveyors, town planners, whatever. And it's one thing for a client to understand all the people in the team that they might need, but it's another to have someone just deal with it all for them. So it's almost like I describe like a wedding planner. Like the client should be there to just make decisions and sign things off and pay bills. But all the hassle and the administration behind engaging all these consultants on the client's behalf and reviewing all of their reports and using their connections to get great prices on all of these people, and setting up a bit of a power team. Like often we'll have a structural engineer who's worked with that builder, who's worked with that certifier, and all of that makes the communication process so much easier. We kind of want the client to not see all the work and the craziness that's happening behind it, and just enjoy the process, because it's expensive, but it's designing their home, and why not try and make that as much of a pleasure as possible. I mean, it's a long journey. If you're doing a proper renovation, it's on average between 2 and 3 years, as much as we try to avoid it. It's, if it's a substantial renovation going through development application, approvals, construction documentation, tendering, it ends up being circa 2 to 3 years. So you want that relationship to be, you're kind of the person who's there from where to go. And so you want to work with someone that you feel you can trust and who really listens to you.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, wow. So many things I could talk about. But so one thing that I think people would love to kind of get your take on, you're obviously in the industry every day kind of thing, and something we hear in the news all the time is like the cost of building. Is it up? Is it down? And all that kind of stuff. Where is your kind of take of where we are at the moment in terms of the pricing cycle? Like, do you think we've kind of gotten to the bottom of it? Do you think it's evened out? Do you think we're still at the top? Like, do you think we're just there now and it's only going to keep going up? I know supply chain issues have kind of resolved a fair bit. How are you, like, what's your kind of take on where we're at in terms of pricing at the moment?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we cover hundreds of properties each year across all of Sydney, and to be able to provide the advice we provide, we actually do deliver full architectural services. So we're constantly in dialogue with builders, both medium tier sort of builders who are working with a budget, and the high end builders as well, just to keep in check with not just where the average square meter rates are, but why they're so high, so low. What are the influencing factors? And it sounds like at the moment, importing is a lot cheaper, but and cost of living's gone up, so labor costs have gone up, and there have been those material shortages. So the spike, from what I've felt, happened around COVID. So the projects we were doing before COVID that were priced before COVID hit, were sitting like at least 40% cheaper than where they're sitting now. I mean, I think it's in some cases feels like cost of construction has, I don't want to say doubled, It's all an economies of scale, so relative to the cost of your renovation. But put it this way, a project that we did before COVID that was a little alterations and additions, let's say in the inner west for 450,000 is now, you wouldn't be able to do it for less than 800.
Yeah.
So that's a serious addition. And things like, you know, people wanting to do additions, like a second story, putting a second story on, you know, you used to be able to do that on a shoestring, but for $500,000, and it's just impossible now. Now it's looking closer at $1 million, no matter which way you look at it. So I would say that the square meter rate for like a medium sort of finish, it used to sit around before COVID, like 4,500 a square meter. Now it's like 6,000-7,500 a square meter easily. And that, you know, when I was working at my high-end architecture practice back in, let's say 2015, that was like a luxe budget, you know.
I was going to say, like, I mean, like when I was at, you know, like with Blaney, like around the same time, that's, you know, you'd go 6, 7, 8K a square meter. That's where we're putting it all in for that kind of thing. Like,
you can, like, as a professional, we can kind of relax. We can have some real fun with it. So it's really hard. And so what I found is I'm an opportunist in that, like, sorry, a positive person. I'm not an opportunist, but I'm a positive person who tries to find opportunities in anything. And so if someone's got a budget, it's just about me being creative to come up with a solution. But that being said, it has felt like in the consultations I've had recently that definitely clients' expectations have not kept up with the erratic, extreme increases in the cost of construction. And understandably, if they're not in the industry, that maybe they just hear it on the news but don't actually understand where those numbers are. Because I mean, already before COVID, people's expectations on what you could do with renovation were already generally less than the reality of how much things cost. And it's not just because it's architecturally designed. It actually has nothing to do with that. It's just the square meters of bedrooms and bathrooms and all the things in between, and how much it costs to build them. So I
was going to say, it's also hard because I think once the price goes up, it's really hard for the price to go down.
Yes.
Because the builders, and I mean, this is not a slight against builders, but it's kind of, once the price is up there and everyone's kind of charging the same thing, and there's still a lot of work, like there's still people building and renovating. I think I don't actually really see what would drive the price down. So
100%. I'm the same. I don't think it's going to keep going up the way it's gone up. I think the big jump of it going up circa 40% is done. I can't imagine. I mean, we couldn't imagine when COVID happened, but I actually feel like the cost of construction has settled. Yeah. But it has settled at such a high number that it has probably, I wouldn't say deterred people, but it has made people reevaluate either how much they can do or whether they can do it. Yeah.
Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe that will mean we won't have so many homes that are being built that are big for the sake of being big and not actually because people have thought about what they actually need. So maybe there might be a little bit of a good side to it.
I do think people are much more in tune with, you know, okay, there might be the floor space to put 8 bedrooms, but we don't need 8 bedrooms. How do we want to live? And realistically, how does anyone who's going to be buying a place in this area want to live? Realistically, it's probably around the 4-bedroom mark with a home office would be great. And, you know, it's much more actually, I think people are also aware if you've got these giant houses, which means more house to maintain as well, that often the backyards are compromised. And with lockdown, people are so much more conscious of their environment being as nice as possible, which includes private open space outside in their garden. So yeah, I actually hope that that's the direction. And, you know, I think there's a responsibility of architects to present that as an option. I mean, every client has, you know, at the end of the day, it's their house, it's their money, and what they want to do, I think, is really important. And it's important for us to respect that. But in general, I think people are more conscious of not having more for the sake of more.
Yeah.
And being forced to as well, because it costs too much anyway. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That is awesome. Oh, my goodness, Nikki. I am Really looking forward to all of our future conversations. I know you are going to be such a wealth of knowledge for our community. How can our community reach out to you and find out more about what you do?
I think the best way would be on the website. If they go to www.testbeforeyouinvest.com.au, there's a contact page and you can fill in an inquiry. Also welcome to reach out, info@testbeforeyouinvest.com.au is our email. We're also on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn and all the medias, but I would say start with the website, Google Test Before You Invest, and that should send you on your way. And yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. I will put all of that in the show notes and yeah, we'll go from there. So thank you so much, Nikki.
Thanks, Beth.
What a great chat with Nikki. I really enjoyed it and I hope you did as well. Some of the things I took away from it were that Nikki's love and passion for making architecture accessible to everyone and how that really benefits the homeowner, but also society as a whole. That example she gave of how the architect looking over the property and being able to see some kind of really easy changes to the renovation plan that would then make it accessible and affordable for them, I just think is such a great example of the value we bring as professionals that I don't think we always communicate that to people. So I found that really helpful and I hope you did as well. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Design Dialogues podcast and I will see you next week for the next episode. Thank you for listening to this Design Dialogue. I hope you have found it full of inspiration and helpful information to take into your design studio. If you would like to unlock the power of effortless studio management and elevate your design business to new heights, please follow the links in our show notes to see how more time to design can help you build a better business. If you would like to get in touch, please reach out on email or Instagram. You can find the links to both in our show notes. I would also love it if you could rate and review this podcast. This helps others find it. Follow the link in our show notes. Have a great week and I will see you for our next Design Dialogue.